I do think that, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you to talk about something so important as the Venezuelan, and I will call the heroic rebellion by the youth of Venezuela, demanding the end of Nicolás Maduro's illegitimate presidency. Venezuela can be defined as a highly corrupted regime controlled by militaries with very close links to the Colombian drug cartel, and of course by the Cuba military. But this is crucially important. In Cuba, at the beginning of the revolution, the military of the rebel army, they did believe in the dogma, the ideology that they were facing and they were propagating. In Venezuela today, basically, the army and there are names that had, and I will mention some of them briefly, that has been actually named by the U.S. Treasury Department as being involved in the drug trafficking. Venezuela is probably today the largest route of drug from Colombia into the U.S. So having that in the background, we can see why some of the high officials in the Venezuelan military are committed to keeping Maduro in power. Now, this, as I said again, heroic rebellion has brought into the forefront the presence of the Cubans, and I call this the Cuban connection. I'll talk about the Cuban connection and the Colombian connection. The Cuban connection, you all have read about, and we had mentioned it here before now. There are about 5,000, maybe now 7,000, 8,000 with the new arrival of special forces from the Minin, hardcore members of the Cuban Minin and Minfar. Hardcore, very well trained, veterans of several fights throughout the world. But also, they have about 30,000, over 30,000 personnel that includes the doctors, the nurses, the different personnel regarding, for example, sport directors and athletes, about 30,000, but they were also trained in paramilitary activities, and they are also the eyes and ears of the hardcore Minin throughout Venezuela. They are also trained to go into the street and manifest their support as Venezuelans, with the mask of Venezuelans, their support to the Maduro's regime. But also, Cuba has enough time to train, and I will say about 12 years, to train Venezuelans that they selected in Venezuela, their hardcore Minin officials, they selected, choose them in Venezuela, and send them to be trained in Cuba. And by now, we understand that there are several thousands of Venezuelans trained in Cuba on these paramilitary operations. Most of them form now today in what they call these motorcycle gangs that they are called the Tupamaros or colectivos. They go out, and there are videos of them shooting at the students in their protests, in their marches. So it is evident, as Brian was mentioning, Cuba will fight to the bitter end to protect their around $13 billion. This is the last number given by a well-respected economist, and it came out just a few weeks ago, Mesa Lago, and he put the number around $13 billion that Venezuela provides Cuba every year. Not only on the over 100,000 barrels of oil, but on the medical, doctors, etc., is a huge number. Is that double to what the Soviet Union gave Cuba at the height of the Soviet operations, which was around 7 billion. So Cuba, our friend Carlos Alberto Montaner says, the Cubans will fight to the last Venezuelans. I think they'll do everything possible to keep this money coming to the Cuban coffers because they do need it. The second is the Colombian connection. This is hugely important, and there are two specific issues that had create, reinforce, and develop this relationship. One is when Chavez authorized around 2002, probably before, but this is the best information we have, he authorized the Colombian guerrillas from the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia to use Venezuelan territory as a safe haven for hospitals, retraining, resting, and supply of weapons. So the guerrillas were able to rest in Venezuela away from the Colombian armed forces. That was one of the issues of the deal, providing safe havens to the Colombian guerrilla. And in return, the FARC, which is not secret, is highly involved in drug trafficking, then provided the Venezuelan militaries at that level. I am not saying that all the Venezuelan militaries are involved in this, but is some of the high-ranking officers, and we're going to mention a few names, are heavily involved with the FARC in the drug trafficking. Venezuela is today the main route of the Colombian drugs into the United States, and is protected by the militaries. So you can see now the Cuban connection, and you can see the military connection doesn't have nothing to do with ideology. It has all to do with corruption. Now, the U.S. government accountability office, oh, by the way, the Cuban connection, the main officers dealing with the Cuban connection in charge of are Ramiro Valdés, el general Leonardo Ramón Andoyo, y el general Carlos Fernández Gondín. Both Andoyo is the second in command of the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Force, and Gondín, the second in command of the MININD. And as we spoke with a Cuban officer that spent about 7 years in Venezuela, he says that at the time, these Cubans, he personally received Andoyo at the Caracas airport, and he says that he came dressed with a blue jean, tennis, I mean, not as a general, but as a common individual, disguise himself completely. The Cubans do not show off their uniforms when they arrive in Venezuela. They do the trick, they do the job and they are very much feared because they, as we had been saying, they are well trained to listen to your conversation, your most intimate conversations. If they want to know your position, if they have any doubts on your loyalty, they will put those equipments and they will listen or watch your conversation. And they are very afraid because the Cubans do this job very well. So there is a combination, the presence of the Cuban militaries, very active, and the presence of the narco-traffic cartels from the FARC using these Venezuelans. And I was saying the GAO, the government, U.S. Government Accountability Office, published an investigation on the drug transiting in Venezuela. The report, the GAO report, is very disturbing. They said at the highest level, there is huge corruption on the Venezuelan armed forces that protect the cocaine movement throughout the Venezuelan territory. And they mentioned some of the generals. I will mention three. General Ramon Rodriguez Chacín. He was the principal link with the FARC. In 2008, Rodriguez Chacín, which is the current governor of Guárico, of the state of Guárico, was charged by the U.S. Department the U.S. Treasury Department of narco-trafficking activities. He was actually charged with several generals from the Venezuelan armies, names General Rangel Silva, General Carlos Alcalá Cordonés, and his brother, Cliver Alcalá Cordonés, which is the chief of the 4th Armored Division of Venezuela, probably the main force in Venezuela. They are all implicated in narcotic and armed trafficking in Venezuela. Now, I will just briefly mention the Iranian Islamic terrorist connection. It do not have the same implication on keeping Maduro in power, but should be, especially the American officials, the American government, should be very much aware that it's not only drug trafficking, but also the Iranian presence. We all remember when Fidel Castro, in 2001, just a few months before 9/11, Fidel Castro gave an ideological directive to close rank with the Iranian government when he says, the American regime is weak. The people of Cuba and Iran will put the U.S. on their knees. Now, since then, it was like marching orders from the Comandante en Jefe, and Hugo Chavez took the cue, and from there, Venezuela and Iran has developed an alliance that is energized by the unbounded, the unlimited hatred of these Iranians and these Chavistas against the U.S. They really hate the U.S. In 2006, Chavez expressed his support for Iran's nuclear program. On July 2nd, 2007, Chavez publicly bragged about the axis of unity with Iran against U.S. imperialism. In 2010, the Iranian president referred to the strategic alliance and stated, Iran and Venezuela are united to establish a new world order. And Iran, what is important of Iran, basically there are two issues. One is uranium, a vital element on the nuclear development. Uranium, and according to experts on the issue, Iranian has over 50,000 tons of uranium available. Now, there are other names that comes to mind, but I will not get into that because we already covered the two main issues, which is the presence of the Cuban, the drug cartels using Venezuela protected by the militaries, and I just wanted to mention the Iranian connection. Now, by the way, Hezbollah, which is an arm, a terrorist arm from Iran, is also have strong ties today in Venezuela, especially around Isla Margaritas. Now, I just want to finish by saying that I do believe that the degree of the rebellion have reached such proportion is larger than and stronger and deeper, that I do believe that the depth and the power of this rebellion had caught the Cubans and the Venezuelans by surprise. And I do think also that this rebellion has overflown the old, basically the leadership of the opposition, the traditional leadership, and a new, younger leadership in Venezuela is being right now born in this fight and in this struggle, and that I do think will make a huge difference in the freedom of Venezuela. I see the future of Maduro very much in doubt. Thank you.